Well, I came into the world. Unfortunately, when I was born, I was born breech, and the doctors had to break my leg in order for me to be born. So I was born with a broken leg,
Hmm.
and so I started out broken in life, and I they had to put my leg in a sling, and I was in a sling for a while, but of course, obviously, I didn't know anything about it. I was too young for that. But that's how I came into the world, a broken person.
Where were you born at?
I was born in Johnstown. I don't know whether I was born in a hospital. I guess I was born in the hospital, the Mercy Hospital in Jaysville, and they told my mother that if I wanted to be alive, why they were going to have to break my leg to get me, and she she said she agreed that it was worth a broken leg, and so that's the way I came into the world. Yeah, and I grew up out, and my dad was a farmer. We farmed 120 acres on shares. My grandmother owned the farm. My grandfather died when he was 31 years old. Got pneumonia, and it killed him. And so my grandmother was alone for a lot of years, and but she kept the farm out there. And then my dad had a brother and a sister, and um I was the only boy, and I had one sister. I had an older sister, Catherine. She's 3.5 years older than I am. I was born in April. She was born in September, and we grew up on the farm, and that's what my dad did. He farmed and raised crops and milked a few cows, and struggled because I remember my dad telling that during the war or during the Depression, because I was born in 1934, and so I we went through he went through the Depression farming, and I remember him telling me that he sold pigs. I think I'm accurate in this, that he sold pigs for $4 a hundred. So he got about $7 or $8 for a pig when he raised pigs, and because everything was so depressed in price, and so consequently it was tough times, and we didn't have much money. So money was really scarce and really precious, and I can remember growing up on the farm, and I didn't have my mother did did laundry on a washboard because we didn't have electricity till I think I was about 11, maybe 10 or 11 before we got electricity. Now we had an ice box in our kitchen, and they'd bring around ice on an old truck from the city ice company, and you'd put a block of ice in the refrigerator, but that didn't keep things very cold. But I remember my dad, when he milked the cows, he would take the cans, because we had metal cans then that they were 10-gallon cans, and you'd put the milk in them, and then you'd put it in the stock tank, where the stock tank was a water tank where the cattle came in and drank. And so we used the windmill, and we'd turn the windmill on and run the water in the stock tank, and try to keep the water cold in the stock tank so the milk wouldn't spoil before the guy came to pick it up. And then our milk went to the creamery, and that's where they just kept the cream, and then the whey back. Whey is a byproduct of I think it's cottage cheese that you get whey off of, and we used to use that mixed with ground oats and give to the pigs, and they just loved it. They would just gobble it up, and they really grew on it too. And so we had horses, and we had two horses, and their names were Tilly and Toots, and they. We didn't have any tractors. My dad didn't have a tractor until the first tractor he had was what they called an International McCormick Deering 1020. It was on steel, had steel wheels, and it would go about 2 miles an hour. It was pretty slow. And then we got in 1938, he bought his first tractor on rubber. And that was where it had rubber tires, and that was an F20, and he bought that in 1938, and I just sold that 2 years ago. I've had that all my life, but I didn't have any place to put it when I moved here, so I had to get rid of it. So I had that tractor from 1938 till 2014, something like that.
So what about would he have paid for it back then?
I think he paid right around $300 for it. My dad only had 4 cars in his lifetime. He owned 4 automobiles. He had a Model A Ford, a 35 Ford, a 1947 Buick, and a 1956 Buick. And those were the only 4 cars he had for his entire life. And because he said that an automobile is nothing more than an expense, and if it just gets you around, you don't have to trade it. So he said, every time I buy a car, I expect to own it for at least 10 years. And I guess maybe he did, because he had a 1926 Model A, or 27, maybe it was a 27. And then we had a Model T truck, and that didn't go very fast either, at top speed of probably about 25 miles an hour, I think. And cars didn't go very fast. I mean, they didn't go real fast. My dad's, the 35 Ford would go probably about 50 miles an hour, but that was pretty fast. And so we had those. He had those 4 cars. I remember the 35 Ford. Some things I remember about it were that the heater didn't work very good, and it was when my sister and I would ride in the back, we'd have to cover all up with blankets because the windows would all fog up.
Mayo.
Yeah, that's going to be on there.
That's all right.
Yeah, John's doing a recording. Okay.
Oh.
That's all right.
Thank you.
There.
Okay.
Now you can pay your bills.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Thanks for getting that.
Yep.
Yeah.
What was it like growing up on a farm?
Well, it was a lot of fun, actually. We had a lot of fun growing up. I remember when I was 10, I got a coaster wagon, and I got it for Christmas, and it was the most meaningful Christmas gift I ever got, because I really loved that wagon and I could play with it. Well, it was, you just entertained yourself. But, we had hay stacks, because they'd pile hay out in the big stacks. And they had corn fodder stacks, because we'd shred the corn. And when I mean shred, you'd make shocks of corn out in the field, cut the corn, and you'd bind it in little shocks or little clumps. Then you'd go out and make shocks out of it. And I don't know whether you've ever seen corn shocks or not.
I don't think so.
But a corn shock was several of these bundles all put together, and because you cut it in the fall, the corn, you couldn't put the corn in what we called a corn crib. It was you'd have the shock standing up out in the field, and then you'd go out in late fall or early winter and get the corn, bring it in and run it through the shredder. And the shredder separated the ears from the fodder, and then you'd blow the fodder into a stack, and then you made a corn fodder stack, and then you would go into that stack and get the corn fodder and bring it into the barn and use it for bedding for the horses and for the cows, because and then you had straw. We thrashed, and we had thrashers. Oh boy, I can remember growing up. My mother would have thrashers, and in the summertime, they'd bring in the bundles of oats and run them through the thrash machine, and then it blew it into straw piles. So years ago, almost every farm you would see a big fodder pile and a big straw pile and some haystacks, because they'd stack the hay up. And then you'd go out there and cut the hay or get the hay off the haystack and bring it in and feed it to the cattle during the wintertime. That's where you stored it. Now, some hay, we used to have hay loaders where it would load the loose hay onto a wagon, and you'd go out with the horses, and you'd go along with the horses, and the hay would come up through the hay loader, and you'd put it on a wagon, and then you'd take it in, and then you had big hay hooks, and you'd just hook into a bundle of it, pull it up into the barn with the horses, and so you had a hay mow full of loose hay.
So before you had tractors, the horses did a lot of the work.
Oh, the horses did all the work.
All the work, and then even once you had tractors, the horses were.
Oh
still
yeah,
involved.
we still used the horses a lot.
Yeah.
When we used the horses a lot because you could train the horses to go out in the field. And for example, my dad used to have horse-drawn wagons for picking the corn in the fall, and he'd go out and he used to tell me, I never did that. I was out with him a little when he would do that, but when I was real little, we still had horses, and we pulled the wagons out in the field, and if he could gather 2 triple boxes of corn, ear corn, a day, that was a big day, because you husked it all by hand. You'd go along the edge of the corn. Well, the ideal thing about the horses is that you didn't have to drive them. The horses knew what to do. You could take them out, and they'd walk along the edge of the corn, and you could tell them to move. You could give them directions, and they would answer those directions and move. So one guy could be picking corn, and it was all by hand. You picked every ear off by hand.
So did you cut the stalk?
No, you just peeled the stalk down and took the ear off it. And they had special gloves years ago, and on the glove was kind of a hook on the side, and they used that hook, and they would bring that hook down and peel down the husk on the corn, and then snap the ear off and throw it in the wagon. So and if you got 2 of them wagon loads a day, that was a big day. My dad was really good at it, because I used to go out with him, and of course I'd sit on the wagon and ride, and I didn't direct the horses. He would direct the horses, but I just sit on the wagon, and they just do what he told them, and he was pretty good, and they would have what they called husking bees years ago. They'd bring all the farmers together in the fall, and they would go in like to a field where there would be a whole bunch of farmers, and they'd have contests to see how many could pick how much corn. And my dad was pretty good. He was one of the top guys in the neighborhood, and that used to be part of their entertainment. They'd have a husking bee. That's what they called them, husking bees, where they would pull the husk down on the corn and throw it in the wagon, see how much corn you get. And of course, they could tell by how much was in the wagon who was winning the contest. And so, that was one way they entertained themselves, And so,
So how young were you when you got started with all that?
oh, I was probably 7, 8 years old, when I used to go out with my dad in the field. And during the war in 1941, when the war came, why we raised hemp, and the Japanese took over the Philippines, where we got our rope from, because that was where we would get our so during the war we had to make rope. We didn't have the rope from Japan that we could use, so we had to make our rope, and they used a lot of rope in the armed services, and so they had hemp mills. They had a hemp mill over by Darien, and we would raise hemp, and hemp was like a marijuana. I mean, it resembled a marijuana, and it was really tall, probably get up 5-6 feet tall, and then you'd cut it and put it in shocks and dry it and haul it to the hemp mill in the wintertime, and so we raised hemp to help out with the war. And we raised oats and we raised corn, and I think my dad had like 7 or 8, maybe 10 cows at the most when I was growing up. I can't remember the exact number.
Were there other people that worked there besides family?
No, my dad worked alone. He had people that would come in and help from time to time. He'd hire help once in a while. If he got short of help, he'd hire help. But most of the work he did on his own. Of course, when we didn't have electricity, you'd have to take a lantern to the barn. We had kerosene lanterns, and we had kerosene lanterns in the house. House always smelled of kerosene because you used kerosene, and they had a wick lantern, and that's how you got your light. And so you didn't have any light. Of course, we didn't have radios or television or anything like that, until we got electricity. And so I don't know how old I was when we got electricity. I'm thinking we got electricity probably about 1940, 1941, 1942, along in there. So I probably was about 7 or 8 or 9 years old, because I can remember the old kerosene lamps, when I was a kid. But then we got electricity, and the neatest thing about electricity, we got a Frigidaire refrigerator, and I don't know what my mother paid for it, but she got one, and we could keep milk cold. You could have a cold drink of milk, and we thought we had died and gone to heaven, because we had never known really cold milk, because you didn't put ice in the milk, and so the milk was never real cold. The water would get cold in the stock tank where we tried to cool it, but it was never really cold. And so we used to have that cold milk and really enjoy it. And
Were there other people that you knew that had electricity, so you knew kind of what?
Well, they
what to do?
worked their way out from Janesville. There were people in Janesville, of course. A lot of people in Janesville had electricity, but it didn't get out to the farm. I mean, they didn't bring the poles and the lines out to the farm. The farms were without electricity, a lot of them a lot longer than the people in town. The towns had electricity, but it didn't get out to the farm because they didn't set the poles and bring the electricity out.
So did you have friends or family that had electricity and had cold milk or radio?
Yeah,
or
well,
something,
we
so you
had
knew what you were missing?
we had some friends in town, so we knew what we were missing. But and then there was a long time after we got it that a lot of people didn't get it that were off the main road. County Trunk A came out, and that was considered a main kind of a main road, and then they had side roads off of that, and still do. They have town roads off of the off County Trunk 8, and off of these county roads. They have county roads, and they have township roads. Well, they didn't run the poles up the township roads, so people that lived on the side roads on the township, they didn't get electricity for a long time after we did. And we used to have a family that used to come to our place, and all they wanted to do was drink milk because it was so cold. They never got that.
Yeah.
And they were off the beaten path, so they didn't have electricity. And I remember when I was growing up that when we first got the electricity, I can remember my dad saying, "We are going to stop. We're going to turn off all the lights. We're not going to have anything going if our bill gets more than $4 a month." We were budgeting. We could budget $4 a month, and the bill would come. And if it was more than $4, well, then we had to shut things down and go back to using some of the lamps, that we had before, because we were just so short of money. My mother made some clothes for me, and she sewed, made clothes for my sister, and we didn't go to the grocery. I thought, she used to make homemade bread, and I thought if I ever got a slice of bakery bread, that was just like cake. and they'd have bakery bread in town, and I'd get a slice of that bread, and I'd think, oh man, does this ever taste good? And my nutty kids from the town, they all had bakery bread, no homemade bread. They'd come to the farm and they wanted to eat the homemade bread because they didn't get the bakery bread, and they thought they died gone to hell. So, I mean, it's just funny how people really, really like different things, and get tired of the same thing all the time. I guess we're no different today than they were then. Get tired of eating the same thing all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What were your parents' names, and what were they like?
My father's name was Ross. My mother's name was Ruth. And my mother was a nurse when she was younger. She worked at Mercy Hospital, and that's where my dad got acquainted with her. And of course, he had farmed all his life. His dad had farmed, and so my dad was a very ethical, honest person. He really, we didn't have much to do with Christianity when I was little, other than my mother was a very strong Christian with her understanding. She got saved later in life, but she just, in her early years, she was very, very hard worker in church. She played the organ and sang in the choir. And
What church was that?
It was the Rock Prairie United Presbyterian Church, which is still out there. It's still out on Rock Prairie, and she was very active in the church. My dad, he wasn't a churchgoer. He just stayed away from church. He didn't go at all, to speak of, until pretty late in his life, and then he started going a little bit, and he came to know the Lord, which I was very grateful for. And my mother came to know the Lord, and which I was extremely grateful for. And then my mother when my dad died in 19, I think it was 1965. It was August of 1965 that he passed away. And my mother then, after he passed away, went back to college. And she went to Trinity College in Clearwater, Florida, and graduated there when I think she was almost 60 when she graduated. My dad died when he was 50. My mother was 1 year older than him, And my dad died in 65, so he would have been 59. And my mother would have been 60. And so she went back to college, and she was in her early 60s when she graduated. She graduated at the top of her class.
What did she go for?
She went for after she came to know the Lord, she wanted to go back to school and get a degree, and so she went back and graduated with a degree in theology from Trinity Bible College in Clearwater, Florida. And she graduated at the top of her class out of all the kids that were there. So she walked across with her gown when she was in her 60s and got her degree. My mother was a very strong Christian, and she did a study of the tabernacle, and she just put that together in such a beautiful, beautiful way. And so she did that when she was, I don't just exactly how old she was, but she was in her early 60s when she graduated from college. I was very proud of her, going back and getting that degree. And but she came to know the Lord, and because my family were what you would call nominal Christians. I was the first one saved in my family, and after I got saved, I don't know whether you want to go into something like this now, or do you want to wait? But after I got saved, my sister got saved, and her two girls got saved, and my wife's brother and sister-in-law got saved, and their kids, a lot of their kids, the Addies, they got saved, because my wife's name was Addie before she was married to me, and so I'm kind of jumping way ahead now.
That's all right.
Because if you want to go back, and because there's some more about my background that's kind of interesting, so maybe I'll just defer on this and kind of go back and.
All right. Well, I'll ask.
Come up through my high school years. And,
yeah. Do you remember what your first memory was in life?
Yeah, I think my first real memory is my sister and I. There was in our house where we lived. We had no. We didn't have gas or fuel oil. We had coal. They brought coal, and we burned wood. My dad. We had a big old buzzsaw, and we would go to the woods. There was about 30 acres of woods with the farm that I grew up on, which was the 120 acres. And we would go up in the woods and get wood, haul wood down and cut it up and put it down in the basement and burn it. And my dad, one of the standout memories that I have, my dad, we would cut wood, and when he would get up in the morning early to go and milk the cows, he would stoke the furnace. Now, overnight, you'd stoke the furnace. We had a big old Holland furnace in our basement of our house, and you'd fill that up with wood, overnight and shut it up. So we had this big old furnace, and he'd bring in some coal, but my dad wanted to, he wanted to do a 90% wood through the winter, because you get that for nothing, because we had a big wood, so we'd cut down trees and let them dry, and then saw them up and chop them up and bring big chunks down and put it in the furnace. And so every Saturday during the winter, my job was to help him with the buzzsaw. I hated that sawing wood because it was cold and your hands would get cold, but we had it to do, So but anyway, he would get up in the morning before he'd go to milk the cows, and he would stoke the furnace and get it really cranking, so the house would warm up, because overnight the house would get down. Sometimes the house got down to 45, 50 degrees because it got so cold in there, because the furnace would kind of burn down overnight, and in the morning it would be pretty cold. So he'd go down and stoke it all up, take the ashes, and then get the furnace really rolling. And when the furnace got rolling, we had two registers, one in our dining room in our house and one in the living room. Now the living room register was about 1.5 feet square. The dining room was about 1 foot square, so it was smaller. So if you wanted to get warm in the morning and you'd come down and if the house was 55 or 60 degrees, it's just cold. So yeah, my first memory is racing my sister down the stairs to get to the big register. Because we'd come down and bring our clothes down and change our clothes in the living room or dining room and get out of our night clothes and put on our regular clothes over the register. We'd just stand on, because the registers were in the floor, we'd stand on those registers. Boy, there was a battle. If I heard my sister stirring, I grabbed my clothes and tore. And that's all I can remember about tearing downstairs and getting on that register to try to get warm in the morning because it was so cold, Mm-hmm. and sometimes she won, sometimes I won, but we would fight over it. That was a fight.
So was that at the White farmhouse?
That was at the early farmhouse on the 120. In 1946, right after the war, I moved. No, wait a minute. Was it 46 or 45? I think it was 45. I moved to where I lived out the rest of my life and farmed up. We started out on this 120-acre farm, which was about a mile, or about a quarter of a mile west of Emerald Grove Road on County Trunk A, and then we moved about a quarter of a mile east of Emerald Grove Road to the house where I lived all the rest of my life up into. I got married and we had a family there and everything. That's where we lived all our life. So I was probably about 10 or 11 when we moved to the new house. Mm-hmm. And
so is the house you grew up in, is that still
there.
Around out there?
Oh yeah, it's still there. The house is still there on the farm. That farm had been, my great-grandfather settled that farm, bought that farm, and it's interesting, the background. I'll give you a little background on that because that's kind of interesting. When he settled that farm, they came. My grandmother and my grandfather came to Rock Prairie to settle. And when they came with a group of people that had come over from Ireland and Scotland. And the Scotch came and the Irish came, and my grandfather was Scotch-Irish. He was my grandmother was Irish, and my grandfather, I'm not sure, I think he might have been French.
So these are your dad's parents?
My dad's parents now, my grandfather. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's probably it's interesting. And they came to Rock Prairie, and they settled there. And they staked out their land. They bought their land. And they came with a whole group of people from Scotland and Ireland to settle. And the Irish went up into the hills. The Irish came with them. And if you go out east of Janesville, and there's kind of a you go back about a mile back from County Trunk A to the north in through Johnstown, and there's a ridge back there, and then there's a lot of hills behind it, and that was the end of the glacier. There was a glacier on this land thousands of years ago, and that glacier came down to that point. It pushed the glacier pushed the dirt ahead of it so that it created hills and valleys. And when my grandfather came to settle, it was Rock Prairie was and that was in the 1800s. It was, I think it was his dad. I almost think it was, yeah, I think it was his dad that came and settled. Um, I can't remember just exactly the details, but anyway, when they settled on the prairie, and they came to that part of the country, the prairie, Rock Prairie, was originally a lake bottom. There was a great big lake there because as the glacier melted, the water came down and formed a lake. And this is going way, way back in history, maybe a couple of hundred years. I don't know, 1,000 years. I don't know how far back it goes. But anyway, that's the story of Rock Prairie. And when they came, the grass was so tall. My dad told me about this. The grass was so tall that they traveled through that you could ride a horse through it and not be able to see a horse next to you. I mean, it was such a tremendous overgrowth. Well, the Irish were a little afraid of that because they thought that might get the water might come back. So they went up into the hills because they'd always farmed on hills. Ireland was pretty hilly, as a country. So they were kind of used to that. So they went up in the hills, and the Scotch, they settled the prairie because Scotland, I guess, wasn't quite as hilly as Ireland. I don't know. But anyway, they were kind of afraid of it. That's the story anyway. And so then there was a whole Scotch, there's a lot of Scotch people still out on the prairie, and there's a lot of Irish people that are up in the north. There's a lot of different, there's the Fannings and O'Learys, and there were several, I don't know what all the names of the families were. And then there were the Barlases and the Macleays down on the prairie. They were the Scotch. And so the church that was built out there that I went to as a kid was known as the Scotch Church because it was built by the Scottish who settled on the prairie. And so that's how it became known as the Scotch Church. And but going back to, my growing up, I remember when my dad got his first car, and it was this Model A Ford, and of course I never drove it. I drove the 35 Ford because I used to take it down in the field. I used to take it down in the field when I was about 12, 13 years old, because I started driving tractor when I was about 7 or 8, or as soon as we got the first tractor. Well, actually from 34 to 38. So I was 4 years old when we got the tractor, and I started probably driving it when I was 6 or 7, so it'd probably be about 1939 or 1940 I started driving tractor, because I was real young, real little. And I can remember one funny occasion. We used to take the tractor out into the field to pick up the hay. We had a hay loader, and you'd have a wagon and then a hay loader behind it, and the hay loader would pick up the you'd go out there with a horse. You go out there with the horses, and you'd windrow the hay into you had a windrower. It had big wheel, and it had kind of like a rake that turned on it, and you'd rake that hay into a swath. Then you'd come along with the tractor and the hay loader, and you'd run over the hay. But then when it went under the wagon, then behind it was this hay loader that would pick it up, and it took it in like a stream up into the wagon. So then there would be a couple guys on the wagon spreading the hay around on the wagon until the wagon got full. And I can remember one funny occasion. This F-20 that we had, McCormick Deering F-20, there were, on the shifting lever, it had first, third, and second, and then if you pushed it straight forward past neutral, and then neutral was in the middle, and then way up and ahead was reverse, and way down and ahead was road gear. And road gear was about 8 miles an hour. And I can remember one day, it wasn't funny, but I was out when we moved to our farm where I stayed for most of my life. We had a hill on that farm. It was pretty, well, you know where it is. You've been out there. You know there's a hill going down when you go up, like to my house. You know there's a hill that it's on. Well, anyway, I was driving the tractor and I had it in second gear. Well, I was so little when I was driving the tractor that I couldn't reach the clutch. I had to shift clear over to the left to reach the clutch on the tractor. So I'd reach the clutch, but the shifting lever was down where I couldn't reach that back, so I'd push it with my foot. I had to get it into neutral. Well, we were out haying one day. I'll never forget it. We were out haying one day, and I'm driving the tractor, and the hay loader's coming behind, and the wagon got full. And my dad was up on the wagon, him and another guy, and they hollered down for me to stop. So I went around with my left foot and pushed the clutch in. And then I took my right foot and pushed on the shifting lever. Well, instead of getting it in neutral, I pushed it clear through to road gear. and it was on a side hill where normally I couldn't start out because the tractor wouldn't pull it. But because it was on a side hill, it had enough of its own inertia. So when I pushed on that lever, it went into road gear, and away we went. And there was still more hay, and I can remember turning around and my dad screaming at the top of his lungs, "Stop, stop!" And here's this hay squirting about 5 feet up into the air, coming up into, because we were flying along in road gear, picking up the hay. My dad was not happy with me. And today it is such a funny thing to think back, because I can still see in my mind, and I was just a kid then, just a little guy. I can still see in my mind that stream of hay going about 5 feet in the air when it was coming off that hay loader, because we were going so fast. And it was funny, but it wasn't funny to my dad, because the wagon was already full and he was just squirting. But these are kind of some of the fun times that you had. My family, my mother's family, there were a lot of kids. She had a lot of brothers and sisters, and they'd come out to the farm, and my cousins would come, and they loved to go in the fodder stacks and play, and then the hay stacks and play. They loved to come to the farm because there's a lot to do. In the city, all you could do is ride the sidewalk. But coming out to the farm, there was all kinds of things we could do and have fun. So, yeah. And then, as time went along, of course, I went through grade school. The school we went to was, I had 3 in my class at school. And there was one girl, and there was actually 4. There's actually 4 of us at the tail end. And one of them, John, was your grandpa.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, I went to school with your grandfather.
So how old were you when you started, and what school was it?
It was Rock Prairie. It was called Rock Prairie School. It was a one-room school. The teacher's name was Mrs. Younkless. And we just had a lot of fun, And there were, I don't know, probably in the total number in the school. Now, a one-room school, so you had first grade through 8th grade all together in one room. And in the wintertime, the stove it got so cold, and the school, of course, had a lot of drafts, and it got so cold that they had to we had to sit up around the stove in front because we couldn't keep warm. I mean, the school was so cold, the stove they had wasn't adequate, and it was an old oil burning stove, but it just didn't do it. It didn't keep the room warm.
Mm-hmm.
So when it got really cold in the wintertime, we'd have to sit up. Once in a while, we wouldn't have school because it was so cold you just couldn't keep up. But most of the time, we would go up and sit around the stove in shifts to try to keep warm. We'd have to go back to our desk, and boy, you learned to dress warm. You had long underwear and everything because it was really cold in that school.
Yeah.
In the wintertime.
Was it the same kind of schedule that they have for school now, where you start in September or so and go?
Yeah,
go to May?
you'd have a 9-month. You'd have a 9-month year, and it was.
What time do you have to get there in the morning?
We usually got there about 8:30. We'd start about 8:30 in the morning, and then
So how far was that from your house?
well, in the later years, when I started out, when I was first, when I was just a little guy before we moved, it was about a half a mile away. We had to walk. We walked to school, and it was. Then when we moved a half a mile, and the school was right across the road.
Mm.
So I could just walk across the road to school. I thought that was pretty neat,
So
Yeah.
is that where you went from 1st through 8th grade?
That went from 1st through 8th grade, and so I graduated from that school. And there were, I think your dad or your grandfather moved away before he graduated. I think they lived just down the road from the school. They lived right next door to the school, across the road. And our place was, if you were going east, it was on the right-hand side, right at the school. And your grandfather, Lee, and they lived down just about, probably a few hundred feet, I mean, it wasn't very far. The field came right up to the school that they was on their property. And so it's probably, maybe 15 rods or something like that your dad had to walk to school. And I went with your Uncle Bob and Rodney and Ken. They were all in school there. I don't know, let's see, was Ken, maybe I think it was, yeah. But anyway, we went there, and I played with your dad all the time. He and I, when we were kids, we used to play cowboys and Indians, and then of course during the war we played war. We were shooting Japs and shooting Germans, and we would have more fun. And we would make guns. You'd take a limb of a tree and cut it where there was a branch coming out, and the branch came down, and then you held onto that. That was your gun. And so if you wanted a rifle, you just cut a longer branch,
Yeah.
And we made our own guns, and then we got some bought-in guns later in life. Things got a little better, and we had some bought-in guns. But we played together all during grade school.
So the school, was it mainly farm families and farm kids that were out
yeah,
there?
Yeah, it was all from right there in the neighborhood. And then they had different one-room schools sprinkled all over the area. They had a Johnstown one-room school, and they had an old Johnstown one-room school, and so that's what we went to, and that's where we learned. So the teacher taught every grade, and I always felt like, kids, I think, really learned a lot, more than people realize by going to a one-room school, because the older kids would be doing their lessons and the younger kids could be listening, and they had to learn to study and do things. We didn't take homework home. There wasn't no such thing as homework. We just got all our work done in the school. We had 2 recesses a day, and then we'd have an hour off or 45 minutes or so for lunch, and we'd go play ball. And we had a ball diamond on the school grounds, and we'd play ball. And
So did you just bring lunch with you?
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you'd either bring lunch with you. Most of the kids brought lunch because they couldn't go home at noon. Later, when I was going back and forth across the road, I could go home for lunch because I could go across the road and get lunch and then come back. And I always remember as a kid, I always wanted to get home and eat lunch fast because I told my mother I want lunch as soon as I get here because I got to get back to play ball. You know, I want to. They were ball games going on, and I wanted to get back to play ball.
Playing baseball? Is that what
Yeah, it was baseball and kitten ball and not much football because that's pretty rough. But we played a lot of kitten ball, you know, and basketball, and we would play volleyball. You know, we had a net up and we'd play volleyball, and it was a lot of fun. You know, you just learned in that environment because you didn't know any better. You learned a lot how to have fun. You learned, and we, you know, those were great days. You know, I just think that, you know, as we get older and more disconnected because of the gadgetry that we have nowadays and the independence and everything, I think we lose some of that coming together. You know, so but then, and I will remember. I'll remember forever the day I got on the bus. You've heard this story before, but the day I got on the bus for the first time to go to high school, graduated from grade school. I tell people, I think there was 2 other kids than me in grade school, and I always tell people I graduated 3rd in my class, you know, in grade school. Actually, I did better than that, but I always kind of tell people, I graduated 3rd in my class because there were only 3 of us, you know, in the 8th grade. But but the first day of high school, they came around with a bus. Of course, they came around, and I'd never. We rode the bus to Milton High, and so we went to the high school in Milton, and I got on the bus, and your dad and I, your grandfather and I, Lee, sat together on the bus. You know, we were good friends, and so we just sat together on the bus. And I remember when Grandma Jean got on the bus, we had gone a long way because she lived way over in the county line, so it was a long ways over there. She got on. I was kind of analyzing the kids as they got on. I'd never met any of them, didn't know any of them. You know, I mean, obviously, well, we knew a few of them because up around Johnstown, we knew a few of the kids. But she lived way over on the county line, which was probably 5-6 miles away. So I didn't know her, you know. She got on the bus, and I poked your dad, or your grandpa, and I said, you know what? I'm going to marry that girl. And that's the girl I married.
You just knew it right then?
I just knew it. I don't know. Something just clicked. You know, it's just weird. But took me a while to get rid of the boyfriend she had. But finally I got rid of him. And so then we went together all during high school. And when we got out, we got married.
Well, I think that's a good place to end it for today. And we'll pick up from there next time. Yeah.
Well, you see, there's quite a little, you know. It's just, as you think back, next time you come, we'll talk about what I did in high school, you know, how I used my time, you know, in high school, and because I took advantage of high school I was a little weird, actually, you know, and I'll tell you that next time.
Okay.
You know, I was a little weird, and you know why? Because I wanted to get out of high school everything there was, because I would come home every night. I'd ride the bus home, get off the bus, and milk the cows. I started milking cows when I was in 7th grade. And I took care of milking the cows all during high school. And I'd have to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning in order to get everything done so I could get on the bus to ride to school, come home at night. So I couldn't have I didn't play football. I wanted to play football, but I couldn't because I had to come home and take care of the cattle, you know. My dad was not in good health, but we'll go into that next time. You know, there's there's quite a, yeah, you edit some of that, you know, and you know, as you go through this, you can kind of edit out and make it into a more concise. But you know, there's a lot in your background that you just don't know about.
Yeah.
You know, there's just a lot there. There's more there than you realize. You know.
Well, and there's a lot that you may not realize that other people don't know.
Well, I am. Well, you know, I just never have gotten the family together. You know, the most we did was when Wheatie died, you know. I mean, we had this round table. You remember? I don't know whether you were there or not.
I don't remember.
Yeah, okay. Well, we had that round table when she died at the funeral home. There were
Yeah, I think I remember now. Yeah.
yeah, and we talked about different things about Grandma, you know, and so. But you know, I think this is really great to get this on record, and you can edit it, and you know, this isn't important, that isn't important. But man, you can have a 2-hour video on
Yeah.
on just your life, you know. It's just amazing
Yeah.
the different things.